Great. So we are joined by Elaine Johnson, Executive Director of Affordable Housing Now.
Sorry, that's Tim and I. It's Housing Santa Cruz County.
Right. Yes.
Sorry.
Executive Director of Housing Santa Cruz County, and as well as the president of our local chapter of the NAACP, and a ton of fun I happen to know from a couple of events. So, Elaine, if you want to go ahead and give us an update on what's going on in housing in the county.
Sure. So as she said, my name is Elaine Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of Housing Santa Cruz County. And it's good to be here this meeting, see some familiar faces that I haven't seen in a minute, like Coco, and good to see Linda and a couple of buddies there, Linda and Tim. But it's good to be here. Yesterday started Affordable Housing Month, right? May 1st. So the whole month of May in several counties and throughout California is celebrating May as Affordable Housing Month, which I'll get more into later, but I just wanted to give that a shout out because it's really important that the community knows the importance of housing. And though we're just focused on May, we're talking about housing every day of the week, every day of the month, every day of the year. In May, we're just kind of really bringing in a bird's eye view of what's going on. And so, being Executive Director of Housing Santa Cruz County, where our mission is to ensure that everyone has a safe, stable place to call home. When I say that, I'm not just saying it just to say it, and to check the box. That's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it because I truly believe in my heart of hearts, and I've been this way since I was a young girl growing up in New York City and being introduced to people that were unhoused, sleeping in cardboard boxes. And as my father used to say, I don't know how they got there to not judge that everybody deserves to have a safe, stable place to call home. And so that's always been important to me, throughout my life. And so working with Housing Santa Cruz County and an amazing board that we have and staff, we utilize our expertise in, whether it's supporting certain bills that come across our desk. And thank you, Tim, for the work you do with that, and Linda, and educate the community. And when I say educate the community, it's not just, talking at the community about, okay, this thing's happening or this thing's happening, but really helping the community understand what a certain bill may mean, what the impact is, if it's voted on, what the impact is, if it's not voting on. Because if there's something that I've noticed living here in Santa Cruz County, there are people in the know and people not in the know. And people not in the know, it really impacts, and this is something I've really noticed in the last 2-3 years, impacts how people vote or actually don't vote at all. And when you don't vote at all, things don't get passed and things don't get built. And so, I'm excited for the work that we do. Me being a New Yorker, and I'm a people person. I'm grateful for the incredible relationships that I have in the community, and this work that I'm doing, and reconnecting with people in the community, deepening my relationships with people in the community who have a stake in how and when we can build houses, right? Because, we can talk all day, but, the bottom line is there are decision makers in this community that I believe that we should work together, come together, and not just have another meeting and check the box, but really come together and work towards bringing a sustainable, affordable housing to Santa Cruz County. Because if there's one thing I do believe, and I know people from all walks of life here in this community. I have friends who wear robes, I have friends who wear uniforms, I have friends that do all sorts of things. We all want safe, stable homes for people. I'm crystal clear. I don't know people who don't want housing. I do, people that I associate with do want to build housing here. It's how do we get there is the issue, right? You know, not everything's a straight line. Sometimes we have to go the back door or take this road or that road. But I think what's important is that the communication and the collaboration, which is so key to everything. And that's something else I learned growing up early on in a housing project, and I'll talk more about that later, is it's collaboration is the key to getting things moved, to getting things built, to getting things shifted. Because what I know from what I witnessed, you know, there are many community leaders, you know, and it doesn't matter the titles. I'm not a titles kind of person, you know, because we're all just people and, you know, in our respective roles. But what I know is everybody's doing I believe, everybody's doing the very best they can in their respective roles. But what I also see is that there's the communication that's not happening. And one of the things that I want to do personally with our organization is to create a coalition where all of the decision makers are at the table at the same time, talking about what ideas and thoughts that they want to have, you know, whether it's putting a tax thing on the measure on the ballot or whatever that is, that we're all on the same page. Because what I find is there's no right or wrong or good or bad, but when we're not on the same page, you know, things tend to take a lot longer to happen. And as we all can see, you know, you can spend years trying to get a project built, and years the project is still not built. And I tell you, from an outsider, someone coming from the Bronx, New York, to a small community like this, that has to shift. I mean, it just has to shift. You know, prior to me being the ED, I spent a lot of years in the law. The law is a big part of my love. And, you know, and in the work that we did in the law, there was many people that needed safe, stable homes, right? And it's not just sticking someone someplace. It's really having safe means you can lock your door. You may not need 3 locks here. That's how we had it in New York. But you can lock your door. You can trust, you know, that you have food on the table, that you have clean water and stuff. That's a safe, stable home. And so, you know, the different organizations that I have worked with over the years, everybody is, I believe, gives their 300% in making sure whatever community, you know, organizations and the people that they serve are getting the needs they met. Everybody, I think, is doing an amazing job. It's just bringing everybody together so that it can come more like, again, like a collaboration versus, well, this group's doing this over here, this group's doing this over here, but that's not working over here and that's not working over here. You know, when people talk about housing, there's always this negative connotation, right? You know, at HSCC and the team can tell you, I try to stay as positive as possible. Otherwise, this stuff can be very draining. But what I do know is, I believe in my heart of hearts that we can shift things here in Santa Cruz County. I believe that. I truly believe that in my heart of hearts. I believe that we have people in the positions that can help us do that. But what I think is important to note is that when we come to the table, we got to be willing to come to the table, one, with a listening ear and a willingness to go from a me to a we. And I say that because there's a woman that I'm going to be bringing here. Actually, she flies in next Wednesday. Her name is Dr. Tiffany Manuel, in short, Dr. T, and her focus is on changing the narrative. We have some narratives that are off the chain, just not the truth. And I believe it's those narratives, which are huge barriers, that is causing people, one, not to be able to build because there's no trust with the developers. There's no trust with city managers. There's no trust, you know, with the CAO's office. There's just this lack of trust with different organizations and, you know, county officials and city officials that are just not the truth. And so, you know, for my role and the role of HSCC, when I talk about educate, again, I'm just not talking at people. I really want to support people to talk about what is the truth, right? And And as I shared a couple months ago when I was speaking, you know, we can't say we're tired of stepping over people in the street and at the same time say no to building homes. They just don't connect. And again, I respect everybody and their perceptions and their visions, because I'm not here, to argue or disagree. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I believe that we can house people who are not housed. And to be clear, we're not just talking about people that are on the street. I have friends who work for the county that sleep in their cars, which makes absolutely no sense to me. None whatsoever. They have a job, they have a stable job, and still struggle to make ends meet, still struggle to not have a roof over their head. When someone doesn't have a roof over their head, people think, oh my God, they just don't have a home, but it's so much more than that. There's no way in the world you can be unhoused and not have anxiety, because I know I sure would. There's a gentleman who doesn't live far from me. I've grown to look out for him the last few years, right? And I think I'm more worried about him than he is, right? But I just every day I make sure he's there, and if he's not there, I'm like, oh, I hope everything's okay. And I share this to say, health-wise, it can't be healthy to be out in the street. It just can't. If a student is trying to study, I couldn't imagine being unhoused and going to college. That just doesn't make sense to me, right? It doesn't make sense to me to have a great job that pays you, quote unquote, well, and to be unhoused. It doesn't make sense to me. And so what I know is that we and everybody on these squares and the people that we associate with and our community leaders who are personal friends, because somebody's got a title, just trust me, they're just people. They really are just people, right? How can we work together to move the needle? And so I want to share a little bit about Dr. Tiffany. I was 2 weeks into the job, and I was asking myself, God, do I want to do this? Because people are already coming at you, right, with all the stories. And a colleague who's one of my board members introduced me to Dr. T, and I spoke with the woman, and I said, okay. She answered my question that was in my mind, and she gave me hope. And I've been listening to her for the last 8 months. She has a lot of free events, and I'm happy to put some of her links in the chat. Linda can tell you about her. And she talked about case made. It's about what are the cases people are trying to make. And it's not a judgment, it's not a make wrong, it's not a right or wrong, but what are the cases people are trying to make? And are the cases they're trying to make, are they coming from a place of truth and fact, or are they just coming from a place of fear? And that really helps me, because I think a lot of what we see and hear when it comes to housing or building a housing project, if it's 6 stories versus 12 stories, I think it's fear more than it is, that someone's concerned about the skyline or the sun being blocked. And again, I'm not saying that this is judgment. I'm just saying this is what I continually hear for years, and what I continue to see is nothing get built. And so, and I shouldn't say nothing is built, because a lot has happened in this community. I don't want to take that away, but a lot more could be built. And so, I don't want to plug Dr. T just yet, but since I brought her up, she'll be here next Wednesday on May 11th, and Linda can tell you more about that and how to register for her. But the reason why I chose to bring her here was for 2 reasons. One, I wanted a different voice to come to this county and speak to us about changing the narrative and looking at barriers and supporting us and standing in our boldness. Whether we have a title or not, we are all leaders in this community. We all are. We all are. And what I also shared with her, and I had a conference call with her again this morning, I said a lot of my colleagues are internally tired, because I know I watch people over the years that have good intentions on wanting projects to happen, and then when you keep getting those barriers, after a while it wears you down. And so I asked her to come, how can you, I shared with her this morning, it's like we need a pick-me-upper. I said, we need a little pick-me-upper because 2024 will be here before you know it. I mean, big time. And it comes with a lot of energy and it comes with a lot of fear. And what I know is, where my HSCC had, how are we going to show up, for this next election? Right now, we're in conversation about that, right? But what I do know is one of the things that's extremely important I feel for me and this organization in the engaging community is making sure people vote. I spoke with a group yesterday that I got invited to, and it was predominantly Latinx. And the focus was around housing. And they had some great questions. And a lot of them, I mean, I had to do everything I could to not cry because I know where they're at. I came from the hood. I came from the housing project. But what I can tell you about the housing project doesn't make us bad people. The building doesn't make us bad people. But there's a narrative that if you're from the projects, if you're from these places, that you're going to bring these things. And those are the narratives that we have to personally stop telling ourselves and telling our friends and telling our families. Because what happens is it blocks people from getting homes here, right? If your skin color is a certain color, then it blocks people from getting housing because, the story, well, they're going to bring roaches. They're going to bring this. Black people does this. They're not the truth. And so it's important, when I spoke yesterday, I was grateful, one, to be invited, but two, the things that I was hearing, I mean, it fed me. May have been one of the speakers, but I got fed. I need that as well to continue to hear what's going on in this community. And that's why I encourage everybody here to get engaged, stay involved, but get out of your comfort zones, get out of your pocket of the world, right? Because I'm telling you, I've spoken on west side of Santa Cruz and I've spoken in Capitola, and they're like two different worlds. Unbelievable. We have to come together. We have to get out of our comfort zones and be willing to hear other people's, I don't like to say sides because I'm not in the sides, but hear what people are saying and then support people in a gentle, loving way, like we try to do, and say, do you really believe what you're saying? Because that's what I do. I'll say, people, love and respect. Do you really believe what you just said to me? Because 9 times out of 9, they really don't. But people have drilled that in their head. And the work that we do at HSCC is we're going to rise above the narrative. We're going to bring the truth to the table. We're going to talk about, we're going to work with. I don't believe in this divisive stuff. It gets nobody nowhere. But work with our supervisors and our city council members and our judges and our law enforcement. And, they call it the 5th floor. It doesn't matter what floor they're on. Just work together, right? Our children, some people don't want to talk about teacher housing. Why not talk about teacher housing? You have to talk about teacher housing. We have to talk about the university. We just have to talk about those things. We have to build that bridge. That's one of the things that I keep telling myself in my role is I really want to support and help build that bridge between the city of Santa Cruz and UCSC, right? Because it's the divisiveness, the fear that things are going to change. I hate to tell y'all folks, but things change all the time. Look what happened in 2020. The whole world stopped, right? And that gave us an opportunity to really check ourselves, right? Check ourselves, check our thinking, check all the stuff we have. I know I did. I looked at all my shoes. I got a lot of shoes. And I was like, I don't need all these shoes, so I bless people who I know who don't have the means, right? I don't see them as deficient, but I want to bless people who don't have access. And that's the other issue. Not everybody has the same access in this county. And we got to change that. We have to think about that. We look at that equity lens. It's not I went to a DEI workshop and I'm all good. That's not it. It's how are you showing up from day to day. How are you treating people in Staff for Life? How are you treating people in Trader Joe's? How you're treating people, Macy's, wherever that is. It's how you're treating people, and consciously ask yourself, wouldn't you want someone who doesn't actually look like you or have the same background as you to be your neighbor? Why not? And I was raised, born, it was black, whites, Puerto Ricans, didn't matter. My father had one rule: don't put your hands on his daughters. That was his only rule. Everybody was welcome to the table, right? And I could tell you, growing up in my housing project, I tell you, there was 6 14-story buildings. We had a playground across the street, and that's why it's also so important, that we engage in relationships with some of our other community partners. These last 5 months, I've been in close relationship with Ecology Action and Land Trust of Santa Cruz County. I was in a meeting in December. I got introduced to Kirsten and Sarah, and we've been like sisters ever since. The 3 of us, I shared with them about Dr. T, and these last 5 months, we worked together to bring Dr. T here next week. That's the work, right? But I want to share that when we talk about housing, that it's not it's not just our world. It's open space. Working with Mariah and Friends of Parks and Rec. It's working with Ecology Action. It's working with Land Trust. Because I think about when I was growing up, we had a playground across the street. Now, if that playground wasn't there, we did get in trouble in the playground, I'm not gonna lie. But if that playground wasn't there, I'm thinking, what would we have done? And I equate that to the work that I do today. Across the street, we had a playground, and then there was all these lots. They started building housing on those lots. And something I noticed, I was probably about 12, and I noticed the people who lived in those houses never walked through the project. They always took the long way around to get to we called it the avenue, but that's where the meat market is, the dry cleaners, all that stuff. We called it the avenue growing up. It still is the avenue. And one day I said to the girl, why do you take the long way to the store? Why don't you cross through the projects? And she says, well, they're the project. And I said, what does that mean? She said, well, mommy told me that bad things happen in the projects. I said, well, I don't think that's true. So I invited her to come to the projects. Let's just say, before she was playing hopscotch with us, Skelsy with us, double dutch with us. And I bring this up to say, again, because back then, there was a narrative, right? That if you live in this building, that these things were going to happen. These people are going to breed these things. And that's not the truth. And in Santa Cruz County, we have to shift that. In Santa Cruz County, and I can't stress it enough, I'm not talking about Santa Cruz. I'm not talking about Scotts Valley. I'm talking about the whole county. We have to come together as a county. It's so critical. And, I want to be conscious of the time, but, today is day 2 of Affordable Housing Month. Housing Santa Cruz County has a stellar lineup of events that's happening. We have I know there's an event on Thursday that we're having at the Resource Center for Nonviolence. But on Saturday, we have our kickoff event. We have a phenomenal author and housing advocate who we're going to fly in from Los Angeles to be our keynote speaker at the event. We have a children's author who's going to show up, and we have a children's corner. But let me tell you about this children's corner. It's a children's corner, but it's going to be for some grown folks too, because I tell you, this children's book that she wrote, it's an Afro-Latina 10-year-old girl who's watching her best friend get thrown out because they don't have the rent money. I know that one. Grown up, I know that one. And she's afraid that they're going to get thrown out. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that was one of my experience. That was my experience a lot growing up. But I read the book at least 10 times already. But the moral of the story is there are so many of our children in this county carrying that burden, that fear that they are going to lose their home. So part of our work is not just to just build houses. It's support our children. It's support our teachers. It's to educate. It's to engage. It's to say, hey, it's to vote. A lot of our Latinx brothers and sisters and community doesn't vote. And we do what we can to support them to vote. And how do we do that? Because that was one of the biggest questions that came up last night, is we create those spaces where people can get educated about ballot measures and stuff like that. And I know that's something we do, but we got to bring it a little bit more like in the Live Oak area in South County versus keeping it in the city of Santa Cruz, because it's huge. I mean, I go to all of those workshops as well, because there are some of those measures that are too wordy for me, and I got a law degree, and it's like, ooh, it's too wordy. But listening to the participants yesterday and talking with them, specifically about the voting, was a comfort to them, because most of them don't vote. And if you don't vote, means you're not engaged. If you don't vote, means they think they're not included. They think they don't matter. They think that then things are just going to happen. Their rent gets raised. And I empowered them to know more of that story. Then we'll shift that story. But it's going to take all of us. That's the work that we do. It's going to take all of us. It's like I tell my board, I'm not just in sign endorsements and we go on to the next thing and wait for something to happen. We have to do the work. We have to help people understand what these bills mean, what we're endorsing, what that means, who's it going to impact, who's it going to benefit, right? Because if there's one thing that I always keep in the forefront of my mind is no matter what I do and what I say, it comes from a place where everybody's included. And I want the playing field to be leveled at all times. And if it's not leveled, then I can't engage. I just can't engage because it's just not who I am. And so, so to talk a little bit more about affordable housing, we have a kickoff event on Saturday at Cabrillo College. I hope you can come. And don't be shy, because I'll probably sit in that children's corner myself and, have that author talk to me about it, because, she's talking about her own upbringing. I don't know how old she is, but she's older than 30, I'm sure. And have the intention of why she wrote the book and the impact that it has had on communities and neighborhoods. I mean, it's so huge. When we think about housing, it's so much bigger than what some of us know. And that's why I think it's important for us to stay engaged, right? Move beyond your comfort zone, stay engaged, where you see there's no access, help create access, right? Where you can see where you can support someone in shifting their narrative, do that with love and kindness, but do it, right? It's working with our state and local officials but like I told people, don't go in there wanting to do battle, because nothing happens that way. It's coming with a listening ear, an understanding ear, and also being that voice like HSCC. We're the voice for this community. We're the voice for affordable housing, but we're also a voice for housing. People say, why just affordable housing? Well, I try not to pigeonhole myself into that. To me, yes, affordable housing is number one, but I also want us to build housing for people who do have the means as well, who can afford, what the rents they could afford. So I'll wrap up with that. Housing, as a social justice issue, we have to stay front and center with it. We just have to stay front and center with it, because without it, we're heading down we'll keep doing the same thing and getting the same results. And I don't know about y'all, but I want some different results. Thank you for letting me be here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Great. Well, now we have our resident experts from Affordable Housing Now, Linda Kerner and Tim Willoughby, who will speak a little bit more about the upcoming events, I believe, throughout the months. Who wants to?
Actually, I'm first. I'm not speaking about events. I'm speaking about affordable housing, period.
Yes.
And I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, and some of the people are just as involved as I am, but I am going to go over some things that some of you might not know, and giving context to some of you who might know the context. But first, I want to thank Elaine. Elaine is so inspiring. I'm sure you would agree. It's just wonderful to work with her, because every time you talk to her, you go home going, just as she says, you go home saying, I want to do something, and I want to get involved even more than I am. So thank you so much, Elaine, for that inspirational talk. Linda's going to talk about some things coming up and how you can get involved. So she's going to come after me and do that. So I'll just move on then. First, I want to welcome all of you to Affordable Housing Month. The purpose of Affordable Housing Month is to inform, but it's also to celebrate. And part of what I'm going to do tonight may surprise you, is not to talk just about problems, but to actually celebrate something. There is a national affordable housing crisis, as we all know, especially in California. But there's also one in Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley. So I want to give you two numbers to think about. So the first one is, as Elaine said, support our children. This is a surprise to me, although it shouldn't have been. But school districts do a homeless student count at the beginning of the year, every year. Scotts Valley this year counted 20 homeless families. 20 homeless families in Scotts Valley. Okay, that does not mean that they are living on the streets, but it does mean that they do not have a permanent housing. Here's another Scotts Valley number for you. Scotts Valley is in the process of working on its new housing element. And in the process, and Jack will correct me if I've got the figure wrong, but in the process of doing that, they discovered that 90% of the employees working in Scotts Valley do not live there. 90%. So for some of those people, that's a choice. But for many, it's not a choice. It's because they cannot afford to live there. So they commute. Some of them commute from far away, from Watsonville, and probably even all the way down past Watsonville, in that horrible traffic mess between Watsonville and Santa Cruz every day to get to Scotts Valley. So we get caught up in what usually surrounds us. We get caught up in that. We don't look beyond us too often, but we're part of a region. And I'm sure you have heard that Santa Cruz, the city of Santa Cruz, is the second most expensive city in the nation for renters. Unfortunately, that is misquoted and misinterpreted. The whole statement is it's the second highest rent relative to income. And so the reality is that there are very high rents in Santa Cruz, but the incomes are much lower than in other communities that have high rents. A quick study reveals that rents in Santa Cruz, I know people in Santa Cruz will scream at me for saying this, but you can check me out. Rents in Santa Cruz are actually lower than in all the cities on the other side of 17. The average is lower. And what's happening is that workers with higher incomes over there, who cannot afford the rents over there, are moving to Santa Cruz for lower rent. And as we know up here, the San Lorenzo Valley has for a long time and continues to be the lowest rent area except for housing in Watsonville. And that's why a lot of us live where we do rather than in other places like in Santa Cruz or Capitola or Aptos. The good news is that it's still lower in general. The bad news is that rents, because those same people on the other side of the hill are coming to our area to pay lower rents. And that's raising the rents. So not as a percentage of increase, it may not be more, but in actual dollars, it's much more. So anyway, that's the bad news. Okay, so those are daunting challenges. But what I'd like to do tonight is to show you that progress is happening. So I'm going to start with Coco and Linda and I. When affordable housing began, all of us remember that there was no one working on affordable housing 8 years ago. No one was. There were some people working on homeless housing, but no one was working in general on affordable housing. And that seems like a short time, But actually, at other times, we've been doing this for a long time. And when we started, and they can chime in, when we started, there were very few rental projects being built. Very few. And most of them that were being built were ownership projects. And there weren't many of those. Most projects, especially projects that had a high number of affordable units in them, in Santa Cruz were actually built after the earthquake. And the reason is because at that time, there was a lot of empty land. The earthquake toppled a lot of buildings, and there was lots of redevelopment money in order to finance it. And that was when a big chunk of the affordable housing units in Santa Cruz was built, probably at least 35%. Well, affordable housing now, we had to fight for every project, every single project we had to fight for it in those last 8 years. And every time almost every time we were outnumbered until very recently by the no growthers and the NIMBYs. And then, as Linda likes to say, and then there were the people who said that they were against having those people in the neighborhood next to them. So that's why they were opposed to it. And that's what Elaine was talking about, especially. So you're hearing about the housing elements now. And so I know some of you know quite a bit about that, so I'm not going to get into too much detail, but they have 8-year cycles, and we're just finishing the latest one. And they're in the process now, cities in the county are in the process of creating the next cycle. And so you'll hear often when you're talking about the housing elements, you'll just hear about the RHNA numbers, RHNA. Those are the numbers of units that are the goals for the different jurisdictions. So here's that good news I was going to tell you about, okay? The good news is Santa Cruz, the city of Santa Cruz, has achieved its RHNA numbers for the current cycle. I'm going to say that again. City of Santa Cruz has achieved its RHNA numbers for the current cycle. All of its numbers, including what has been the hardest to achieve, the number of units targeted for very low and the low income categories. There are very few cities in the whole state who have met their numbers. And none of the cities, other cities and the county, in our county, are even close to meeting their numbers. So how did Santa Cruz do the impossible, you might wonder? Well, we have a simple explanation at Affordable Housing Now. To get affordable housing, to get any kind of housing, you need 3 things: land, money, and political will. So land, you have to have land to build on. And for 100% affordable projects, that land often has to be basically free because there just isn't enough money to build an affordable housing project otherwise. The city began a long-range planning for its downtown area. Over a decade ago, they began that with housing as a major component. There were planners and there were lots of community participation, lots and lots of meetings. And they decided one of the things they decided to do was to make better use of the many surface parking lots in Santa Cruz. So here are some things that help meet those RHNA numbers. The metro station, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but you may not know. The metro station is going to be rebuilt. There will be the bus station on the bottom floor and a few other things, but there's going to be 90 affordable housing units on the top of the metro services. The land between it and that large building that you see going up on Laurel Street with all the tower, all the cranes going around right now, that tall building. There's going to be a project there that will have the Diantis medical services on the bottom floor and 90 affordable units on the top. Again, that's city land, part of which was a parking lot before. And then there's the library project, which is also on a surface parking lot that will have 124 affordable housing units. That's the most of any project ever built, most affordable housing units ever built in the city of Santa Cruz, ever. And then the parking lot owned by the Calvary Church, if you know that on Cedar Street, the Calvary Church used to lease the property for parking for the city of Santa Cruz. And now there's a project there that's well underway, 64 100% affordable housing units. Okay, and that was possible because of the leased land from the church. The church made that possible. So you can just add those up and right away you can see those are just the affordable housing units, 100% affordable housing projects. So now we'll move on to the second item, money. This is a little easier to explain. Money, all of those projects I just mentioned are funded by using tax credits. And one of the reasons why it's working, because those are very competitive. You compete with everybody else that's trying to build an affordable housing project for the money, and there's limited money. But Santa Cruz has one of the best development departments in the city of Santa Cruz does. And they have a genius down there named Bonnie Lipscomb, if some of you may know her. And she is just fabulous at securing funding. And that's where that money came from. So now we'll move to the final one, political will. Political will, it takes 5 to 8 years, and sometimes even longer, for a project to work its way through the approval process. And Santa Cruz is one of the worst cities in the state to get anything built. And it's also one of the most expensive to build in. And that, believe it or not, while some people won't admit it, that's intentional. It was intentional to discourage building. But one of the most important changes recently is that there's been state intervention. There are over a dozen recent bills that have made building housing easier. And there are more bills coming right now. There are more bills in the legislature to make it even easier. The most important has been the density bonus system. It was designed by the state to incentivize the building of rental housing and affordable housing with the greatest incentive to build very low and low rather than moderate income units. Years ago at Affordable Housing Now, we actually worked with some other groups and organizations to create a bonus density system. And we were doing it for the county. At that time, the county had an in lieu system for projects where the developer just paid money to the county and then the county used it to build things. And we were trying to get a density bonus system set up. And that was a huge step. But the state version is much stronger and much more incentivizing. Just a few years ago, I mean, like 3 years ago, there were almost no projects in the city of Santa Cruz, market rate projects that were being built. There were almost no projects just 3 years ago. Now there are over a dozen in the works, all of them using the density bonus system. And all of those density bonus projects are building very low and low category units. Those are the hardest to pencil out and still get financing. And of course, there are some people who moan that the percentage of units that are affordable in the market rate projects should be higher because there is a percentage requirement and it should be for the total number of units built. But the system, in order to incentivize builders, the system is set up where what you do is you take the piece of property, and if it's zoned for 50 units, that's your base unit. And so in Santa Cruz, 20% of those 50 have to be affordable housing, affordable units. But it's the whole part about the bonus. The bonus is you can then do more units. And usually that's the difference, like a 4-story project would be the 50 units, and they'll let you build one more story. And the purpose of that basically is to make it pencil out. Very low and low units. Some people don't understand this. A very low unit is twice the subsidy of a moderate unit. Twice the subsidy. So what happens is, to get these very low and low, is you divide up the cost of that subsidy among all the people that are paying full rent. And the more of those you have, the less each of them has to pay. So that means their rents don't go up astronomically also, just to support the affordable housing units, but that's what pays for those units. The other renters are actually paying they're actually subsidizing the rents of the people that are going to live next door to them. What a beautiful idea, huh? So finally we get to political will, and there are still people filing lawsuits. As you might know, we're now on the second lawsuit against the housing project, the student dorm project on the UCS campus. The second one, the first one still isn't even settled. And there's still people organizing to stop projects, but state laws are prevailing. And so approving a project before was an entirely political battle, but not so much now. That's the good news, and that's why this is working. In addition, the Santa Cruz City Council has changed. Before it had members who talked affordable housing, oh, we're for affordable housing, but voted against nearly all the projects that would produce affordable units. And there's only one member left who still is in that category. So that's progress. So progress is possible, especially if we help cover the backs of our electeds who have to stand up to the no people. That's a tough job, and they need our help to get the job done. So thank you. You all know we're all in this together, as Elaine said, and that's one way you can help. So now Linda's going to give you the rest of how you can help.
Well, thank you, Tim. And yes, Affordable Housing Month is a time to bring the community members together to unite and to advocate for affordable housing. And you all have a critical role to play if you choose to accept it, and we hope you do. As Tim mentioned, we're just beginning, jurisdictions are just beginning to move into the new housing element cycle. And what that means is jurisdictions, so the county and the city of Scotts Valley, are in the process of planning to meet the housing needs for the next 8 years. So it's a big process, and those housing plans also have to address the housing needs for different affordability levels. So what Tim talked about, housing for the very low income, moderate, and above moderate. The state has given us numbers, scary numbers, because for Scotts Valley, for example, the numbers are many, many times over what they were for the last cycle. So for the next 8 years, Scotts Valley will need to build 1,220 housing units. So they have to figure out, and there's not a lot of land. So where is that housing going to be built? So you're going to learn more about what the city is thinking when you come to our event next Monday. I'll talk about that a little later. The county's numbers don't break the county numbers, RENA numbers, those housing goals, out by areas. So we don't have distinct numbers for SLV compared to other parts of the county. But of course, the housing solutions for SLV are going to be looking very different than they might be in Live Oak. So you're going to learn more about that also on Monday evening. But also a part of the planning process that cities are going through in the county for updating their housing elements is involving the community. So they have to have public community meetings to provide opportunities for all of you to provide input and be a part of the planning process for how we're going to get housing that meet our housing needs for the next 8 years. So, I mean, it's a unique and a critical time and an important time for you all to be involved. So I'm going to tell you what's happening for both the county, how you can get involved in both the county and Scotts Valley housing element activities. So for Scotts Valley, if you go to the city's website and then go to the planning department, they have a specific web page for the housing element update. And you can go there and you can see what's already happened. And there was a very, very interesting meeting on April 5th with the City Council, a joint meeting with City Council and Planning Commission. And personally, I think it would be worth your time to listen to it. It's about an hour and a half long, Jack, would you say? It was just extremely informative, and some of the public comments that came up at that meeting, I think the city council and planners have taken to heart, and I think some things came up that maybe the city wasn't thinking about, things they could do to make it a little easier to get housing built. So these meetings are really important. And also on that housing element update page, there's a place for you to sign up for emails so you can be notified when there's a meeting coming up that you might want to attend. Also, there will be a community engagement meeting coming up soon. Jack, do you happen to know a date? Has a date been set for that yet?
Not for certain. At the council meeting you just mentioned, it was shown that workshop number 2 and public review would be in May.
Okay.
Now we're meeting tomorrow night. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks, so it might happen then or it may not. But if it is happening in 2 weeks, you'll hear about it very shortly.
Yeah, it should be soon because I know they want to submit a draft. They're hoping to submit a draft to the state by the summer. So sign up for those emails so you get notified and you learn when there's going to be an opportunity coming up, and you need to show up. You need to be a part of the planning process. It's really, really important. And for SOV folks, for the county, they have a web page, and a direct link is 2023 housing element at santacruzcounty.us. And there, you can also sign up for email notifications for upcoming meetings. They also are set up so you can submit comments and you can submit questions directly to that website. And the county has 2 community meetings coming up this month. There's one next Monday. This is an in-person meeting. It's on May 15th. It is in Aptos, Aptos Village Park Hall from 5:30 to 7. And then there will be a virtual community meeting on Wednesday, May 31st, at the same time, 5:30 to 7. I'm planning on going to the virtual meeting, but those meetings are specifically for you to be able to show up and give them input. You know, what kind of housing do you think we need? Do we need more rentals? Where do we need to build it? What concerns do you have? This is your opportunity to have a voice in the planning process. So it's a unique opportunity. This is a unique time, and when we're entering into a new housing element cycle. So pay attention and get involved. So then the really important thing I want to tell you about is the event that we have coming up on Monday evening, this upcoming Monday evening, May 8th. It'll be at 7 o'clock. It is a virtual meeting. The Zoom meeting link is on our Democratic Club website under upcoming events. So Ray has it nicely listed there. You can also go to Housing Santa Cruz County, and all the affordable housing events are listed there as well. The event specifically for Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley will be, you'll be learning more about the specific planning efforts that are currently underway. And then the speakers are going to be talking about possible solutions to how are we going to get all those housing units built. And the speakers for Monday night's event will be our very own Jack Dillis, who's the Scotts Valley mayor, and also City Council member Derek Tim, who's on the city's Affordable Housing Committee. And for the county, the speakers will be Matthew Sunt. He's a policy planner for the county's planning department, and Jennifer Duffy, who is with Hello Housing, and she is managing the county's ADU incentive project. And that's a kind of a new program for the county that's going to make it easier for homeowners to build ADUs. So I think that by attending this meeting on Monday evening, it's going to better prepare you for these public community engagement meetings coming up, because you're going to learn more about the housing element and what's been happening as far as planning goes, and also the solutions that are being explored. And it will be food for thought for you to think about, okay, what are the questions I would really like to have, or do I have some ideas that I think I should share with the county or the city? So again, you know, it's an important time, and like Elaine said, it takes a village. Community leaders by themselves, developers by themselves can't get housing built. They need people to show up. They need housing advocates to show up at those meetings and support the projects. It's really important. Council members, board of supervisors, county supervisors need to have their backs. So remember that's a critical role you'll have to play, because if you don't show up, the NIMBYs are going to be there, and the voices are loud, and a lot of projects don't happen because of that. So you have a really critical role to play. So I'm counting on you being there Monday night. So I think we have a little time if people have questions. Do we, Ray?
Does anyone have questions? Laura.
This is actually kind of kind of shows my lack of knowledge a little bit, but one of the questions I have is about whether, with all these projects that we're doing for Santa Cruz and more broadly, are these primarily rentals, or are there also going to be opportunities for, again, lower income people to be making purchases into property eventually? For some,
it varies. There actually have been few, well, I guess I'm speaking more for Scotts Valley, there's been few rental projects. However, there is a pretty large rental project that was recently approved, Oak Creek project with, I think, 52 units.
And I understand both can be needed too. I just was curious, because I know sometimes that can end up causing maybe short-term help, but then long-term you end up always never getting equity to the
right. And another thing to think about is, you know, as far as housing needs, we probably don't need too many large single-family homes anymore. I think we have enough of them, but we could use the ADUs in their backyards. But you know, do we need some projects with smaller units, studios, for, you know, people who are either young adults who are just starting out and, you know, single, don't need a lot of space, so it could be affordable for them and very workable. The other thing to think about is climate change and the lack of land. And so really the only way to meet these arena numbers is going to be to build up. And if you build up and you're able to build developments near transit centers or bus stops, then you can have fewer parking requirements. You can get more cars off the road because it's easy for people to walk across the street. If we're looking at housing at where the town center might be, walk across the street and get in a bus and get to your job. So, you know, everybody should be an advocate for a housing advocate and be involved in, you know, thinking about how it should be built, where it should be built, and what kind of units do we need. So just some food for thought for you guys to think about.
Laura, there's a little bit more to you that answers your question. What has changed? Before, most of the projects around the county were all ownership projects. It's only recently that they started building rentals, and that's because the state laws and incentivize them, because that's what we're most short of. But there was one in Scotts Valley. There was one that was finished like last year, maybe. Jack, do you remember?
Yes, we just approved it 6 months ago. The Oak Creek Park project, all rental. Although
no, not the rental. I'm talking about ownership. There was the ownership project on
Scotts Valley Drive.
Scotts Valley Drive. Yeah.
There's and that same builder is building homes right next to that now. Again, ownership.
Yeah.
And so we really want a diversity of housing. We don't want to get too many single occupancy. We agree density is important and going up to an extent. We have a 35-foot limit that's going to probably have to be adjusted somewhat, but we want that range of housing, and we know we need a lot more rental. The great majority of homes in Scotts Valley are owner occupied, and that folks that live here want to keep it that way. So a lot of folks, I shouldn't generalize too much that way, but I'm just saying I certainly talk to a lot of people that don't necessarily think we need rental housing unless you're in the market looking for rental housing. So we need rental housing. That's what we haven't been building, and we need a lot more of it, and we know that.
The other thing, Laura, is that for builders, the affordable units in for sale unit projects, it's hard for them to sell them, because you have an income to qualify for those units, but you also have to qualify for a loan. And sometimes that's really hard when the bank starts looking at it to say, oh, well, you're only making this much, but can you really make that kind of a mortgage payment? So it's hard for them sometimes to sell those. But the other thing that's happening, there's a statewide project, and counties have been doing this, but most of them have run out of money. But there's a lot of down payment money available. It's kind of like an interim loan for people. Lots of places, there's a lot more of that going on, and there's a lot of effort to get more funding for that.
Cool. Thank you for answering that.
So just to add on something there, one of the reasons sometimes people have trouble getting mortgages or loans to buy into these homes is because they have little or no credit. They come from underserved or underprivileged groups. And as it happens, I'm very proud to say that the company I work for is all about that. It's about helping people who have little or no credit build up credit, whether because they're immigrants in this country and have no record with the U.S. credit system, which is, I mean, you could be anybody and you'd still have that problem, or whether you come from, a background that makes you underserved or underappreciated by standard credit companies. And but once you build up that record, then you will get a mortgage and you can get the American dream, and that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah. Okay. So do we have any other questions? I'll make a little bit of a comment, since I keep thinking, when we have these conversations, I keep thinking about what are the obstacles, and one of the things I've heard this said a number of times, which is, I wouldn't want housing built that I wouldn't want to live in. And so when we're talking about the single family dwelling idea, I kind of think back on my own experience, which is that I'm from out here and kind of more in the woods originally, and am very appreciative of that sort of mountain lifestyle. I'm, the person who drives around with a saw in the back of my car during the winters, and that's fine. I would never have imagined myself wanting to live in apartment buildings. That it was something, when I thought of my dream home, I never ever thought I would ever consider living in apartment buildings. But I won't go down how I got there, but at one point I had the opportunity to live in a very big city in South America, and it was kind of an amazing eye-opener of an experience, what it can be like to live with 40 other families in the building. It's such a community that can come out of that. And it has its downfalls, because if you get a bad neighbor, you got to deal with the bad neighbor, but that happens here, and it's so amazing what can come out of that. And it's also, it takes so much off the plate of homeowners in certain ways, so that you do get all these, I lived in a building that just had everybody in it, but it had plenty of seniors in it, in different sort of capacities. And what you had often neighbors helping out neighbors, because the person down the hall can't really walk very well. And so they'd run down the block and get them groceries and that kind of stuff. But also it meant that that's a person who doesn't, upkeep is sort of a different situation when you're living in shared housing like that. And again, that can have its pros and its cons, because you have to work together to solve some of those issues. But it's really a wonderful thing. And I'm now forgetting who said this, but I think Linda said it does. Like when we're talking about, do you want a big home? Do you want a small home? We need to really account for the diversity of people who need housing in our community. And there's plenty of times where I would have liked this small little place that I could afford on my own. And so we do need that smaller housing also. There's no need to have a giant house but there's not a lot of those options around. And I will also say, I've really done an about face in terms of what building up means in terms of being in the woods, because honestly, one of the things that I really have come around on is, I always want, I'll put a house out in the woods and it's got a, big sprawling piece of property and that's my dream house or whatever. But you have to drive all the way out there, right? So then I'm feeling guilty because you have to drive out to this property, and then maybe you need a truck, and then all the trucks are terrible emissions. And then we're also cutting down some trees because you don't want the trees to fall on your house. And then, you got to clear space because of the fires, and you got to whatever. And so then we're cutting down nature, and we're harming nature by getting there. And the idea that we could be just very close and not be cutting down our forests and not be polluting this world in that way, and have that access, so we prevent this sort of, the urban sprawl idea, but we're very, we can maintain our parks and our green spaces that we can all share. I think is an idea that I've really come to appreciate and hope other people reconsider also when we're talking about these things. It's this idea of empathy and sort of deciding what other people, when we're talking about housing, like sort of listening to what other people's perspectives are, I think is really important, because we're not all going to have the same perspective and we're not going to have all the same needs. But understanding also, maybe I can reconsider what this vision is that I have in my brain, and maybe there's something here that I'm not really, I've just always lived this way, because, and honestly, a lot of the people here have just always lived this way. In the mountains, we're very accustomed to a particular kind of housing. And so sort of reimagining what that can be, and also have it, not feel like it's changing our identity fundamentally or something. I think is a really interesting sort of exercise that we should all try to practice. But those are my 2 cents. But
Ray, just to piggyback on what you just said, we lived in Zayani we raised our family there, and we had a large property, and it was a lot of work to maintain. And yeah, you gotta drive into Felton to get your groceries and drive home. And if you get something, it's a pain. But life, where you are in, life stages change. And, our kids, they, grew up, got married, left the house, and we couldn't manage the house. And Mark had some health issues, and we just couldn't live there anymore in the mountains. And now I can ditch my car and walk to Pete's to get my latte, and I love it compared to living in Zayani. It's that was one of the biggest treats in moving to Scotts Valley was, I mean, I can walk to Nob Hill, walk to the movies. So, you know, we're all in different stages of our lives, and our housing needs change as we get older or start families. And so we do need, I guess what I'm trying to say is we do need a diversity of housing types to meet the needs of our communities.
I can walk to lots of places from here. I just don't want to walk back. For those of you who don't know, I live at the top of a hill. So walking down is one thing. Walking back up El Soyo is another thing.
Yeah, I hope you have good hiking boots.
Yeah.
Yeah, the high schoolers used to run that hill for exercise. I don't think they made it all the way up to where you are, though.
More power to them.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for being our guest speaker, and Tim and Linda also, thank you for bringing your expertise as usual. And we hopefully will all make it to the May 8th.
Yeah, I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be taking roll.
Good. And we will also share out all the information on all the other housing events that are coming up. But this is fantastic information and a great conversation to keep going.
Yeah, and even on that, as I think I mentioned in the beginning, on your agenda that you sent out, there's a place that just says more housing month, more events here. If people just click on that takes them right to all of the events that are going to be happening.
Yep.
So that's another way to get to the Zoom link for our meeting too.
Good. Okay. Well, any final thoughts? Questions? Jokes? Elaine, you're muted. Are you?
I just want to say thank you and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you
for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm worried about the calendar. Its days are numbered.
Oh, there we go. Brutal. All right. With that,
Bye-bye.
returned.
You asked for jokes. I gave you jokes.
Okay.
You appreciate it.
Back next month. Bye.
Bye.